Okay, welcome to the Somewhat Creative Show, the podcast where we explore the tools, ideas, and stories shaping the creative world. I'm Rocky Tilney, here with my trusty co-host, Clark Miller.
That's me.
And today we're digging into why some brand redesigns flop. And we're also going to take a look at a few famous disasters, recent disasters too. Later in the show, we're joined by Daniel Hutson, EVP of Creative Services at MacKenzie, a storied San Francisco communications agency known for its deep roots and diverse client work, from aerospace and engineering to national parks and nonprofits. Let's jump in. Clark, how are you?
I'm hot, Rocky. It's hot.
Your AC
It's hot
broken?
in the valley. No, I went on a walk a little bit ago and then got back and was like, I'm going to be sweaty for our podcast. That's not good. So if I have a little gleam
now,
just listen to this pod. Don't watch it on YouTube because I'm going to have a little bit of a glare from my forehead.
You don't sweat, you sparkle, man.
There you go. That's all special effects.
All right, we got some good stuff today. I'm excited about this stuff too, because a lot of times we just talk about how to succeed in graphic design and branding, but never do we just sit there and talk about the failures that happen.
That's true.
And I feel like, we're small, scrappy designers. We've worked in small agencies and some larger firms, but it's amazing how even the big firms can completely blow it.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess I've never been surprised when like a small company, that has a 2-person team puts out a bad logo or something, but how does a multi-billion-dollar brand screw up so badly?
Right. So we have kind of a new segment, and we're calling it "They Spent How Much on That," which is kind of funny because some of these brand fails are pretty damn expensive.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and we're going to also try to learn from it too. Like, you're a big agency, you still make a mistake. So what is it? Are they not reading the research correctly, or they're making a lot of assumptions?
Yeah.
Or they don't realize how much people just really love the brand the way it is, and they don't like change. I think maybe all of those things might be true.
It could be.
There's a really recent one that's been talked about a lot, and I've kind of avoided it because it's been getting a ton of press already, and I didn't want to be...
What are you talking about? You talking about Jaguar? Or are you talking about...
It's a car brand.
Okay.
It's a car brand, and I've seen all the stuff. I've seen the ad. I've seen the rebrand, and I honestly didn't get it. I thought they were maybe releasing some type of different product, but it was actually the rebrand, and you've done some digging into it. Let's talk a little bit about Jaguar and what happened there.
Well, so the hottest take that I heard back when this was all going down back in December, I think, was when they came out with the rebrand, and they had the now infamous commercial that featured no cars. It was just random assortment of people, young folk, kind of, doing different things, talking about being different and not copying, and copy nothing was, I think, their tagline. And they got a lot of bad press. I did hear one branding aficionado I follow talk about how this could be the greatest like stunt in branding history, where they release this sort of like, this is our new direction, and then 3 months later, come out with their new car that's amazing looking, and it's like the new Jag. And he said you could imagine Idris Elba coming out onto the stage in this new Jaguar and coming out and like ripping the poster of the rebrand apart, and like the real rebrand that focuses more on the heritage of the company and the car brand as a whole and its history, becomes apparent, and like this whole thing was just a marketing ploy to get people talking. It would have been the greatest, one of the greatest marketing stunts in brand history if that had happened. And sadly, not so much happened. Now they've recently fired the agency. They're still under contract for another year, I think, but they've pretty much cut ties with the agency that was responsible for the rebrand. And I think a lot of people are probably scratching their heads as to why they ever thought that was going to work.
Well, it's interesting, too, is that none of these things just get released out there without client approval.
And marketing testing and
revisions.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if they did any of that. Doesn't sound like they did.
That's the weird thing about some of these. And I have not dug into like what the process was like for some of these brands, but did they do no market research? Did they do no sitting in a room with real people and people that love the current brand, and nobody kind of came out and said, this is a bad idea? I don't know. Did they just not listen to those people? I don't know.
Yeah. So what was the whole point of the rebrand? Was it to just freshen the brand, to gear the brand toward a younger audience?
Yeah. I mean, the brand is dying.
Mm-hmm.
Jaguar is, facing the same headwinds that a lot of older car brands are facing from new brands like Tesla and the electric companies. And talk about a success story in recent marketing branding days lately has been Slate, the new, Amazon.
The truck. Yeah.
Yeah. With
the Lego of the automotive world.
Talk about a polar opposite of the Jaguar rebrand. You had the Slate, launch of that brand, and it took a totally different pathway with doing almost a similar sort of idea, which is targeting a younger demographic, targeting people, but they did it in a way that appealed to content that those people would be watching, rather than like, hey, let's just get a bunch of young people in a studio and show them against colorful backdrops and,
well, to be
clothing.
fair, they started with a blank slate.
They did. Which can be a blessing and a curse. It's like
Slate
the Slate. I caught on to that. I wasn't going to acknowledge it because it was terrible, but I caught on to it. I liked it.
You should have.
I liked it for dad jokes all over the world.
But it was a brand new. I guess the point was that it was brand new. They didn't have any history or tradition or anything to worry about. They could brand this however they wanted to, and obviously the price point, the customizations, there's no paint, it's a wrap, it's a polycarbonate body. They could do whatever they want with this thing. It's completely new, and it's going to appeal to some people.
And I think the way they appealed to people by doing these kind of viral stunt marketing things where they had the car like a mortician driving it, and different companies
really cool.
branding it.
Stuff.
It was so amazing, and and we've talked about it on the podcast before. It was such a great brand launch, but you compare that with what Jaguar did, which was just they basically, for all intents and purposes, launched a new brand because it was so departure. It's like their car even doesn't look anything like the heritage of the Jaguar car. So it's,
did they even release a car design during that rebrand?
Yeah, like a month later, they unveiled their new, I don't know, E0 or Z0.
I feel like they should have done it like the other way around. They should have announced the vehicle along with the rebranding.
Well, they're trying to get that. They were trying to get that sizzle up. They were trying to get that like anticipation.
There's lack of context, though. I think too.
Yeah.
Like, well, why the rebrand? Well, what is it? Because there's something new coming? Yeah, I guess they're trying to build. They're trying to build excitement around it.
It's and it did for like all its failures. I mean, people talked about it. You can't say they didn't get some press. It was all pretty negative press, at least.
You almost wonder if that was the point.
Yeah. I mean, well, that's why a lot of people were thinking, is this a stunt? Is this like, do they know that this is bad? Because everybody looked at it and said, how did this get made? How did this go through different, people? And like, the only thing I can think is that, they were a lot of older people trying to appeal to a younger audience, and they thought this is what younger audiences want to see. They want to see, colorful images and people that look like them dancing and, that kind of thing, which I mean, anybody probably could have told them that's not a good idea, that's not what people want to see. But
I think you'd have to, it would have to be a rebrand that was maybe, a nod back to its tradition, but also, forward looking at the same time. I think they overcorrected.
And how do you do that? Well, I don't know. That would be, you could write a book on how best.
Well, you still need the cat.
This is true. And they still had it in some ways. It was a much more subtle, like less used portion of the branding, but they had a much more streamlined version of the Jaguar. But it overall just really flamed out, and I think we've seen the repercussions. And also, and it's it's a brand in desperation. They're trying to find a life raft in this. It's a hard thing to do to take a company, to your point, like a new company that's coming on the scene has none of that heritage and that looking back to think about. It's like they had to turn the Titanic, and I think that they turned right into an iceberg. Well,
it'll be interesting to see where they go from here. We'll keep an eye on them. Here's a good one. Here's a question for you, actually. How do you lose $100 million in less than a week, and it has nothing to do with meme coins?
Ooh, I would say go to Disneyland with your kids.
Yeah, that's $200 million.
Yeah, that's true.
So this is a good one. In 2010, Gap decided that they wanted to rebrand. They wanted to, again, skew a little bit younger, look a little more modern, try to capture that next generation coming up for their products. So they spent $100 million in 2010 to rebrand their logo. And it was essentially moving to Helvetica type style font with a little box off to the right of the logo. There was so much backlash when this happened. I remember exactly when it happened. It was when Facebook was kind of getting bigger and people were sharing this stuff. And so it was all over social media at the time. And there was so much bad feedback from their customers and just from the public at large that they pretty much killed it within a week.
It's kind of interesting. Yeah, a week is like, that's the quickest. I mean, Jaguar is still hanging on, but they haven't quite killed that new branding yet. But it's interesting because I remember the logo they came out with, and it in 2010 was the kind of direction a lot of brands were heading in, this more simplified, like getting rid of serif and everything going to the, simplest form that it could in order to play across different screen sizes and usefulness in apps and little icons and stuff. It's like, it wasn't a bad idea, but like, I guess to throw out again, they threw out everything that had worked for them in the past.
Right.
But again, another brand that was suffering. Like, I think the common thread is like, maybe don't make these decisions, to rebrand your company when you're flailing for a rope to pull yourself out of the quicksand.
Yeah, and a lot of the critics were saying that it was sort of a reactionary move on Gap's leadership part because their sales were dropping. Like the year before, it was 10% drop than the previous year, and it didn't help them whatsoever.
Should we admit then maybe that I don't know if I can admit that a rebrand or your brand can't pull you out of a tailspin and bring your sales back up, because I think we've seen it happen, and we've seen branding that can lift,
Well, here's the thing. Company. Was it worth the $100 million to get all that conversation going around your brand on social and all the sharing? So they're paying for expo. That's an expensive PR play, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, I think it probably somewhere around that same price for the Jaguar rebrand.
That was a lot. Yeah, that in 2010, that was a lot of dough.
Yeah, for sure.
And they actually used a New York agency, which is a surprise. They should have used a San Francisco agency, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, paying attention to your heritage again. Like, if you find a brand, a company to rebrand you, a branding agency or anyone that I think loves the company and knows what's best, I would be interested to see how many of these failures are led by agencies that hadn't been in that space before, hadn't worked with the company before, were coming in super fresh, didn't know the history of the companies. I don't know.
Yeah, and we're seeing a lot of these, to go on a little bit of a tangent here, we're seeing a lot of these large agencies with these multi-layered approaches, account approaches and account managers and all that sort of being consolidated for efficiency and cost reasons. I don't know. I still think there's probably space in the market for $100 million rebrands, especially for more complex brands that have a lot going on with their logo. But that might be changing. Who knows?
Is the right move in these situations, if you're going to lose so much of your brand heritage and history in a rebrand like Jaguars or like Gap did when they got rid of their iconic logo, is it almost worth changing the name of the company? Is it worth kind of throwing everything out? If you're going to throw out the baby with the bathwater, why not throw out the whole house, the whole bathroom? I don't know.
Right.
Come out with a new name. I don't know.
That's even scarier.
It's not something that happens ever. I know it's especially in this day of URLs and things, but
good luck.
I don't know. I don't know if that's a right move, but
I can't even think of an example off the top of my head of a naming.
They used to do it in radios. My parents were in radio for years and years, and that would be the thing that a radio station would do when they were failing, was like, well, let's just start over and we'll just come out as a new radio station with a new format, new logo, new name, new everything.
Does that ever matter though? I mean,
in radio it did.
It did?
It worked.
I just remember, people just know the number, the frequency, right? Does it?
Yeah. But it was so different. I think people didn't even know that it was like the same company. They thought somebody must have bought this and changed it. But
Right. Well, we have one more rebrand fail that we could bring up too, which was another one. This happened right before the Gap logo rebrand. This one's a packaging rebrand, which people just flipped out over. That was Tropicana.
Mm-hmm. Did they only do the packaging, or did they change the logo?
Well, it was their logo too, but it's it's interesting because your logo is prominently displayed on your packaging, so it becomes part of your identity no matter what, right? That's how people see it. It's not, it doesn't have the same sort of brand affinity that maybe, Gap would have. It's more of a corporate brand or a fashion brand, right? So it's a different thing. This is more like what you see in the store, what you see in the aisles.
And I'll be honest with you, this one, it makes me kind of think this is one I would have been involved in and been like, yeah, this is cool. I
liked it too.
I know. It's it is a more modern kind of, if you look at the packaging, it's like they went from what appears to me to be kind of pretty standard fare as far as
right.
orange juice branding goes. And they tried to stand out by looking really modern and, turning logos on their sides and doing things that felt much more of the time. Like, this is 2009 again.
It did look contemporary.
It was
contemporary. It looked fresh, and I don't think there was anything controversial about the design, but people just flipped out. They liked the old design.
People liked the old design, but I think the bigger problem was people didn't recognize it. They were looking for their orange juice that they liked, and so they lost that 30 million just in people thinking that there was no Tropicana in the store because they just didn't recognize the brand.
That's why the packaging is such a risk, changing that in store, especially.
Yeah, when you're on a shelf.
I mean, you could clearly see a difference in the packaging. So they went from the orange with the straw, the red and white striped straw that was stabbed into it. And for those of you listening to the podcast, our video version will have screenshots of these logo rebrands. So guys could take a look at that later.
Use your imagination, though.
Yeah, or you could use your imagination, or you could just look it up. But anyway, they stabbed the straw into the orange, and it was such an iconic thing. I think they used to do their commercials that way too.
Yeah, I think in the 60s and 70s, and they actually had a straw
someone stab it in there, which is kind of cool.
That was how they marketed it, which was great.
Yeah. So this one's interesting, though. Tropicana sales dropped 20% after the rebrand, within 2 months of the rebrand. $30 million loss. Just because someone wanted a new font and new visual design in there. I mean, this just goes to show, people think branding is a simple change, a simple tweak, and there's a lot of thought that goes into it. But even when you put all that thought and effort into it, it doesn't always mean it's going to work out.
Yeah. And they have since then rebranded in a new and kind of again they relied on the heritage of the brand and the icons of the orange with the straw, but they've cleaned everything up. They've made it more modern, but with a little hint of retro. It's a pretty nice new branding by what was it? Sun House design agency called Sun House. So that'd be an interesting one to look at, the result of a failure now that they've come out of that.
Well, we just so happen to have a brand strategist on with us today, so let's get our guest involved.
Let's do it.
All right, joining us today is someone who knows a thing or two about building reputations, literally.
He's the Executive Vice President of Creative Services at MacKenzie, a San Francisco agency that's been shaping brands and telling stories for over 40 years.
Over the past 9 years, he's helped lead creative work across seriously wide range of clients, national parks, engineering firms, to mission-driven nonprofits. And we've had the chance to partner with him on some pretty cool projects in the past.
Please welcome Daniel Hutson to the Somewhat Creative Show.
Dan, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us.
Do you get that a lot? Do you get the hut?
I get it all the time.
Really?
Yeah.
I would have
all
never
the time.
Never guessed that.
If I had a buck for every time.
As someone with the name Clark that gets a lot of, Superman and Clark We Need You. I don't know if anybody's familiar with the Clark Pest Control Company that was big in California for a long time.
Yeah, they're still around.
Yeah, a lot of brand equity in the Clark brand.
Nobody ever makes fun of my name, ever. I feel so left out.
In fact, when I first met Rocky, I thought it was fake. I thought that's not your real name.
My wife still thinks it's fake.
I love it. I love it. It's hard. You got to really sell. It's hard to be a Rocky. I think you fit it, which is awesome.
It helps to
Really?
be bald,
I don't know.
Yeah.
I would picture Rocky to look way different than me.
like Sylvester
Wait.
Stallone.
Yeah, you know how
That's
we
what
look
I
in the
picture.
mirror and you have that like you just don't connect with the person. You're just like that's not the way.
Well,
Anyway, we digress. We should talk
That's-
about branding and stuff,
We are getting
right,
deep
Dan?
into some like psychological issues that Rocky has. Let's talk about brands.
Yeah. So Dan, you've worked with at MacKenzie for 9 years, as everyone knows in the intro. But MacKenzie's was around 31 years before that. Tell me how does an agency like MacKenzie sort of stay relevant with all the changes that we're seeing happening in branding, communications, marketing today?
Yeah. Well, it's I think it's testament to good leadership. I work for a very talented, smart person in Janice MacKenzie. She started it at 29, and I think McKenzie's become somewhat of a little bit of an SF icon in terms of some of the smaller agencies out there. And traditionally, we kind of made a name for ourselves working around the strategic comm space, right? A lot of strategic comms, and then we moved into marketing comms. And then around the time I got there, about a decade ago, which is wild to think that it's already been almost 10 years working with the agency, but we started to shift a bit and really up kind of our creative services game at the agency. And a natural progression was to focus more on brand communications, a lot around brand, because it's half of it's what your brand looks like, and then the other half is what people think about you, right, and what you're saying about yourself and how you're saying it. So at the end of the day, we were really good at storytelling before, and then I think we've evolved a bit over the last decade here, and really kind of kept up with some of the other agencies in the area that are doing more creative stuff.
And Dan, how did you start in this biz? Is there a backstory? Did you go to school for this? Did you how'd your kind of journey into this industry start?
Yeah. So I'm, I think a lot of times, and Clark maybe have a different story, but a lot of people get into agency early on. They get in their 20s. I had worked a couple different jobs in marketing and development, and then I thought, I really want to immerse myself in a lot of work with a lot of different organizations. I was kind of bored in that way, and I thought this is an exciting path. I think agencies for me, and I was early on in my 30s and came in, and actually I was working with a mentor that had previously worked with an organization that was a client of MacKenzie, and they had done a great job working with an organization called M Squared Consulting. It was a bit of a high talent C-level recruitment firm that they had worked with on brand and reputation. So I got put in touch with Janice, and we hit it off. And the agency, I remember the first meeting that I had, I went in there. It was kind of just an informational meeting, and they were pitching Cal State East Bay, previously Cal State Hayward, which is now Cal State East Bay, on this big campaign, this creative campaign, rising in the East. And they said, "Why don't you just sit in? You should just sit in on this pitch here." And I loved it. I thought this is so cool. I'm all about this. I'm all in. And then from there on out, it was great. And that felt like yesterday. And then fast forward about 40 clients later, here we are.
And was this sitting in? Were you officially hired at this point, or was this like right after you met?
I was not.
Okay,
I was not. It was one of those things. I was interviewing at different agencies, and then I met, and then just by circumstance or whatever, I was introduced to MacKenzie. Like, you should check them out, and set up an informational interview, and we had a great discussion. And it was like, if you really like it here, and we're not hiring at the time, but if you really like it here, maybe you should just sit in. And I was invited back, and that's why I was sitting in on this particular day. And it was great. The culture at MacKenzie is one where I think there's an openness. There's this belief that everybody can add value, and you have great perspective that comes from each and every person. So I remember the team actually turning to me and saying, "Do you have any thoughts? What are your thoughts on this?" With the client there.
Wow.
And I thought, well, that's a nod of confidence and
hot seat.
I would have been like, "You guys don't know me at all. This is not a good idea."
I don't know that I don't think I had a great answer or great insights at that point in my career.
Putting you on the spot.
But I definitely didn't embarrass myself. So
I mean, I think you bring
Yeah.
up a really interesting point too about these, even if a company's not interviewing, you can do an informational interview. You can just kind of contact them and say, "Hey, I really like your work. Like, would you be willing
Mhm.
to have a coffee?" Or, in case anything down the road comes up. I think it's a
Yeah.
great
I mean,
tip for younger people.
it's a two-way conversation, right? I mean, you have to, at the end of the day, it's as much about you finding a good fit for yourself as it is about the agency using or getting talent out of use. That's why I dig the informational interviews and the idea that you should go in there and it should be as much about the organization making a good impression on you as vice versa.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that was my start.
That's great.
That's how I got in to the agency, and then here we are today, and we're still chugging along, and doing some exciting stuff.
So Dan, if you fast forward, you weren't a creative technically back then, or considered yourself a creative, right?
No.
Was that something that you saw kind of some potential in, like leading creative teams in the future, and you thought maybe, oh, this is something I could help companies and help other organizations with their messaging and communications, but also help creative teams deliver what they need. How did you make that bridge?
Well, you both can appreciate this because you're both designers by trade. Is that right? You were through and through creatives, and I'm probably more on the somewhat creative scale.
You're in the right place.
But
yeah, this is the right show for you.
Yeah. I mean, I think early on, in my career, in my education, my pursuit of education, obviously I studied mass communication and media, and then I got my grad degree. I got my MBA in branding, and but from a brand strategy standpoint, right? So I was into it. I loved it. I'm very passionate about brands and about storytelling. But I was not a designer. I am not a designer. So I'd like to think that I know enough about it to be around it, and I have enough humility to be able to work. You have to be able to work with creatives.
We just appreciate that somebody said they're not a designer for once in the world.
Totally. So even in my role, my role is to make sure that that I'm leading a team of creatives, and that we're putting out really great work, right? And that we're challenging the industry as a whole, and that we're doing the best work for the clients. So I just try to get the best out of people that are talented in their own respect, right? And to think about, and that's always a challenge is how you provide feedback, what type of feedback you give to creatives, right? That can touch on technical without being technical. It's really just about, hey, are we thinking about things this way? Or tell me why you did it. I'd love to understand, how did this aligns with the strategy, or what the end all outcome is. So I bring that with me. I think I've gotten a lot better at that over the years, but obviously it makes it easier for me too when you're around good designers. I think we do good brands because we're fortunate enough to have some awesome people on our team. So
well, and it sounds like you encourage that kind of thinking in your designers and the people you work with to really not just think, does this look good, but is it achieving the results, the goals that we've set out for this project? I think that's something we all have to learn as designers too, is that we can't just make something that we think looks cool. You have to really think about, is it the right cool?
Kind of moving things. It's hard. You don't want to have a conversation or think about design in purely subjective terms, because that's the wrong way to do it. Because everybody's passionate. If you're the one that's putting something together, you're going to be really passionate about it, and that's not a great place to question it, like with healthy skepticism, or to think about if we are thinking through all the different angles. So to your point, we always start with exercises like developing a brand personality, or making sure that we have agreement on our objectives and how we want to position a brand. And then when we actually start putting, pen to paper or mouse to screen, whatever it is, to be able to go back to that and say, is this achieving what we set out for? And why did we do this? Because we want to be able to communicate what that intent is. Yeah,
that foundational work is really imperative for any successful project. And it's one of the things I learned later in my career because it was more about the design and the creative process and less about the strategy. But it took me to working with a creative director out of an advertising agency for 5 years or so to really grasp the idea that everything starts with a brief and a strategy, and you use that as your foundational document, because at the end of the day, the work that you present, the creative work you present, you have to be able to go to a client with that and say, we did this because of what you said here or what we agreed upon here. And if without that, you're just guessing.
Mm-hmm. Well, and on the topic of guessing and how to do it right, our show today, we've been touching on brands that have failed. Are there any example, like, you don't have to name names, and this could be even from projects you didn't have a hand in, but like, are there lessons you've learned? Have you had those kind of failures before? Have you missed the mark? I don't know. I always feel like we kind of learn so much from those opportunities too.
Well, first of all, we work with, and I'll say, I think our sweet spot when it comes to brands, we work with a lot of small and mid-size organizations, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, where we really come in is when organizations are either transforming or there's some sort of moment, some sort of like inflection point, right? They're expanding, they're scaling, they're reinventing themselves after 50 years. But I do look now where we are today in this landscape. There are a few industries where there's some brands that are under the gun, the aviation space, right? You think about some of the biggest brands, and Boeing comes to mind, but there's a lot here, right? And it's about, I think, at the end of the day, the public has to trust your brand. So trust is a big thing. So they're under the gun, and the other aspect is some of our social media brands, they're not what they were, and obviously there's a lot of factors that are going into that are contributing to changing sentiment. But we try to connect this a lot. I think this is the other side of our workspace, is that how brand brand value or sentiment is a reflection as well of media coverage and other things like that. And that's the other side of our business, right? Is thinking about strategy in light of media and media coverage. So we don't get to, as much as important as it is to be able to tell your own story, it's harder to control that story nowadays.
Yeah,
it's true.
So, I don't know if that's kind of a. So those are the big categories of brands. I think. Are there any specifics for our client work where we've maybe learned a little bit as we went? I don't know. I have to think about that. I'd have to think about that without naming names.
Right. Hey, if you've never failed, you never failed.
Oh no. Well, there's always trips, right? And sometimes a project that should take about 90 days or about 4 months ends up taking about a year because you learn along the way. There's more info.
Hopefully, and I think that's probably the beauty of the process, and hopefully you make those failures happen early enough in the process to recognize it and shift, and none of that actually goes out into the world. It's all internal. And I think some of these brands that we've talked about, Rocky, probably needed a few more of those opportunities to fail internally before they reached out into the consumer marketplace.
Yeah. I want to go back to something Dan just talked about, though, and that was timelines, because it's an issue that every creative agency deals with, is this sort of scope creep, or these just endless sort of odysseys that you go down for whatever reason, and you can't quite pinpoint, maybe, unless you do like a retrospective on why did it take so long, or where did we fail, or what was it? So I was wondering, from your standpoint, managing larger projects with multiple, with a team, where do you usually see that extension of a timeline happen? Is it like client communication? Is it, deliverables are too complex, or?
Well, I do have a different perspective on timeline. One, because our agency, and a lot of this is project oriented work that we do, right? But we've also worked, we have for years, supported organizations almost as an outsourced support team as well, like on brand management initiatives, design, communication. So when you look at our portfolio of work, there are clients that are on retainer, and then we have project-based work, right? So that's always a little bit of a juggle to keep things on track, and then on the other side, you kind of are just around and available. So those are two different things. But I don't know, when it comes to timeline, when you set it out, I think it all comes down to that first phase. It's all about like discovery, and if you do a really effective job in the research and the intake and on reaching sort of consensus with the client on values and expectations, then that makes the entire project typically go a lot smoother. If you try to rush through that, or if you find that the client maybe isn't as candid or doesn't understand the ask, and things start to come up along the way, then you have to go back. A lot of times we'll get into, phase 2. You think about it this way: you're done with your intake and you jump into some of the brand personality work or the planning stages. And then you realize that you need to go back and talk to additional audiences, right? That you don't have organization wise. Not everybody's provided their thoughts, and maybe you're lacking in some of the insights.
Yeah. How many times
that will really
that happened to all of us, I'm sure.
Yeah. That's the number one issue. It's actually very rare. And then, the second part, right, is that when you do come up with concepts, whether you're pitching creative or design or whatever it might be, if you present them right, hopefully it goes well, and at least you're moving in one direction.
Right.
They don't like anything that you got to go back to the drawing board, but that
scary,
rarely happens if you do it right.
There's 2 scary scenarios when you present creative. They like it all 100%.
Yep.
Or they don't like any of it 100%. Those are both bad.
Those are both bad.
Because it doesn't open up a dialogue about where maybe you're, what direction to go in from there.
I saw you guys had on one of your earlier issues you were talking about. It might have been the one where you were talking about pitching and about selling ideas to the client, which are equally as important.
Absolutely.
Right. Because it could be the best idea in the world, but if you don't know how to pitch it or present it right, then it's dead.
Yeah.
And I think one of the questions that came up was like, do you tell the client what your favorite is?
Yeah.
Like this direction one, that's what we want. And that's one thing. One time, my associate and I went to this conference. It was the brand new. You follow brand new under consideration. It's kind of it's this weekly thing, and then now they obviously do this kind of roadshow conferences. But they had an agency on, and they were telling us about their trick. Their trick was to add motion to only one of the 3, whichever one of the concepts, whichever one of the directions you want the client to go for. Save it for last and add some animation, right? Add some movement to it. And then that's a quick way to guide them in the direction that you want. So we do that now and then, although I'm kind of sharing that with the crowd.
That's your little insider tip there.
Now they're all going to know. Oh, I can tell which one they like the best.
Yeah. Well, and that's funny, the order of when you present. I think we talked a little bit about this during that episode as well. And thanks for listening, Dan, by the way. You're the second person to listen to that one. So that's great.
I'm the one. No, I'm I've been creeping on Spotify and y'all for quite some time here. Good stuff. Good content coming out of this.
We're trying.
Out of this podcast.
Well, one thing that comes up often too is you guys have a fairly diverse client base. Engineering, firms to nonprofits to national parks. How do you switch context so quickly? Is it all based on kind of the foundational strategy that you follow, or do you guys change it up depending on who your client is?
We do change it up. I mean, we provide different solutions to different clients, but in general, and it depends which team members we have on each job as well. But you saw a little bit of that. I mean, Clark, I don't know if Rocky gave you any details, but we worked together on 2 projects in the last, 12 months or so, or maybe a little bit more. But one was rebranding. One was rebranding.
And they both failed terribly.
Whoa.
They're thriving. They're thriving today. And we were fortunate. They were good brands, strong brands going in,
they were
but
great
just at
projects.
a time of change. Yeah. But we worked on a marine engineering construction organization that was 40 years old, and we worked on a advisory tax accounting business in San Francisco that was over 100 years old. One of the oldest, legacy brands, well known in its space. So 2 very different things, right? And like one is we just had these. We're using these kind of badass pictures of divers and, like this really cool and cranes that are
great photography.
4 stories tall.
Yeah,
great photography.
Amazing photography.
Yeah.
I love that.
But you know, so it is different. I mean, it's challenging in terms of the identity itself, and you wanting to make sure that it resonates with the audiences that you're going after. But the other part is just like the messaging and the copywriting and all that stuff too, because some of these are really technical. You know, we're working on one right now, working with a nonprofit in the animal welfare space, doing great stuff. And shout out to Berkeley Humane in the East Bay here, but they're launching a big campaign, and they're a new big space that's going to help more and more animals. But you know, if you think about messaging around that, versus a private sector kind of thing. So we bring on different people. We really have to challenge ourselves. A lot of times, we have this kind of ramp up period, and we take great pride in this, but after our intake or as part of the discovery, we got to go, we got to visit the client, we got to immerse ourselves. We kind of get into it. So that's how we try to quickly become members of the team and figure out how we can feel like we're on the inside.
And what does that look like? Like, what does that kind of entrenched in these companies look like for you? Does it go spend a day there? Is it just schedule several meetings? Is it kind of a mix?
Yeah, we're a little bit old school in that way. And again, I think we work with clients all over. We work with clients way outside of the Bay Area as well. But here locally, it's a little bit easier, right? We're in San Francisco, and we make the trip out. You know, we worked for over a couple of years with the Presidio Trust in San Francisco, to your point, and which is just beautiful. Who wouldn't want to spend a day in the Presidio? But we went many a times because that was a comprehensive rebrand, working with their all of their lodging, you know, working with the golf course, working with the park as a whole. So we went out there. I mean, we did visits to check out the merch. We went on full tours. We met there, a lot of that stuff, you know, and more recently, like I said, with the Berkeley Humane piece, we went down there, we saw the animals, you know, want to see the space, want to get a sense of what's being changed and where they're building out things. So for us, I think for us, it's an important part of our culture at the agency, because if you don't feel connected to that, then you just don't really have the passion for it.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
It's right in line with, I think, one of the things we were touching on before you joined us, Dan, was are some of these failures, these brand failures, partially due to that? Is it we talked about Gap and how they hired a New York agency when they have such strong ties to the Bay Area.
Yeah.
And that was such a failure. Like, is there something to that where you have to find the right agency, the right partner, the right people that have that affiliation and that knowledge base to know what the next step should be? It seems like that's one area where you guys excel.
Yeah, I think so, because, you know, you can be skilled and have talented folks, you know, in terms of design or writing. But if you don't really understand, if as an agency, if you're not connecting with the brand and the audience, right, and the true objective, then there's going to be a disconnect between those two. So, and I also think the other part of this is if the client feels connected to you, you get a much better product. Like if you have a great working relationship with the client, and you're just going to get more information out of them, and you're going to end up learning so much more. So I think anytime a brand is considering, you know, going elsewhere, going, you know, with the top dog, just because reputation precedes them, but there's not a great relationship there, then they may not get it.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the relationship part of it, because I always feel like that's the number one thing you should be striving for when you have a new business opportunity, is trying to establish that relationship and create a strong relationship as much as possible. Because when you do have those stumbles during a project, that strong relationship is going to be what gets you past the stumble into, you know, the next level or the more creative work that comes out of it. So a little bit of friction, I think, is always sort of good in a relationship and in a project, because it does help you kind of build up those kind of stronger bones throughout the course of the project. So that's an important one. I'm glad you brought that up.
I think it applies too to internal teams. I mean, as someone now not on the agency side and internal at a team, like I think those relationships internally can be so important that you know the different departments, you know the people in them, you know what they're working on. Like I think that's a component that we could all use in our strategic branding creative lives for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
So one thing, Dan, that
relationship.
One thing that comes up every episode, and we joke about it because we can never avoid it, and that's AI and how we're seeing it shift. And I want to get
about Allen Iverson.
Yeah,
let's talk about Allen Iverson.
Talking about practice.
I'm talking about the game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we talk about it from a practitioner standpoint, like if you're a designer or a writer and how you use it there. How does an agency deal with AI? There's been, I've been reading a lot about agencies spinning off sort of AI versions of their, like small little like lab versions of their agency to do AI work. We saw the ad during the NBA finals that some guy did for $2,000 rather than $100,000, and it aired on national TV. Have you guys talked about this internally? How do you guys, see or view AI as sort of a teammate, essentially?
So we use it. We'll use it for ideation. We'll use it to like get the ball rolling on something like internal. If we're thinking about something and you want to kind of, we're spitballing some stuff and we want to use it that way. I think one of my nits is you will get. I mean, and you'll get clients now. We'll spend days, weeks putting together messaging for a client, and it's very nuanced, but thinking through each and every word and what it means, right? And how it aligns with positioning. And sometimes the client will come right back with like something that they threw into ChatGPT, with the M dashes and everything. And boom, it's like, it's kind of, and it's not good. Like, it's just not good. And it's kind of offensive, right? And you think about it and it's not their fault. It's just like, that's what it's become. What's scary is when organizations think that where we are right now, and I know it's going to be even better, but where we are right now, as awesome and amazing as AI is, it's not a true substitute. Like it doesn't, when you're crafting messaging, it really needs to be thoughtful about the audiences and what it's trying to serve. So we're up against that. That's the point, is that you realize when you think about messaging development as one big part of what you do, it is a little bit it's being threatened by AI because of people's perceptions. So on our part, we have to do a better job of using those things to ideate and to come up with new ideas internally more quickly. People, and there's also a little bit less tolerance and patience for the duration of the project, right? Because everybody wants things so quickly now,
right?
So we use it. I mean, we'll use some ChatGPT. We use some other tools, of course, and like for some of the identity stuff, we can do when we don't have artwork, we can use Midjourney and some other things and in those. But to us, I think it's the messaging component that is most under threat, and copywriting.
Right. But you could definitely tell if you have a seasoned writer, their writing style versus what comes out of AI are completely different. Yeah.
Well, I think the problem too is speed is not always, it's counterintuitive somewhat, but speed is sometimes not always a benefit, right? Like I think we're talking, earlier about those failures along the way and the timelines that it takes to really craft messaging and brand and expression and voice. I think the problem with some of the AI stuff is even if you get it to write something good or to position you well and to come up with something that's usable, like it's so quick that maybe there's not enough time for everyone to sit with it and to think about it and to go back to the idea stage and say, is this fitting what we want to do? It's like it's all kind of coming together so fast, and the expectation is around it is, pump this out as quickly as possible. That I think, it to me is like we're going to get into those situations more often if we're using AI to generate those ideas than if we took the time to do it ourselves and really think about it.
I mean, we've leaned in a little bit more, I think, as much as we become more specialized in certain areas on the agency side, but I think there is some value as well in being able to have some utility and to be able to do several different things and to focus on different areas. Like for us to have, to be able to work on marketing comm stuff and then also brand, it makes us a little less of a chance of being obsolete, right? Because you can do more and you can see the angles that some of these platforms can't and some of these more specialized things. To your point, Rocky, that commercial it's scary that the reel that came out that's completely AI generated, right? And you think about what that might mean for production companies, right? And
it was a crypto company, I think. I don't even remember the brand. That's how, it was such an outlier in terms of the visual that I don't remember the brand at all. But I know it aired during the finals.
Yep.
But they got it done fast.
And it was a weekend.
Right.
Yeah.
On the week.
But to Clark's point about, remember the slow food movement? It's still a thing, obviously. Maybe that we'll have a slow content movement or slow creative movement where we slow down and pause a little bit, because I can't tell you how many times I've had what I would consider sort of breakthrough ideas happen way down the road of a creative process, and I was doing nothing related to the project. It was cooking or in the car or whatever. And because you need those things to sort of marinate a little while, not to use a food analogy, but just to settle in. And then you have that, you're able to look back and make and understand if it's contextually relevant to what you're working on. But if you go quickly,
miss those
you're not sure.
opportunities.
Are you guys, how concerned are you guys when you think about AI and just, the competitive landscape right now? Being an agency person, agency people here, what is
I also believe that you have to lean into it right now until we see how it shakes out. We may go away from it. Maybe there'll be the anti-AI agency. But I think for now, and maybe it's client perception too. I guess part of it for me is, are clients expecting a budget stretching to happen? So they have a budget for the work, but they want to stretch the budget. They want to see more ideas, more concepts, or they want to shrink the timeline. So there's the values change at this point, right? Because they're going to know we have these tools and we use these tools and we talk about using these tools. So I think we have to understand from a client perspective, is there a shift in values to get the work done? Or do we still have creative freedom to take the time we need to get the work done? I don't know, Clark, how it impacts internal creative, but that's kind of what I'm seeing on the agency side.
I mean, for me, this whole movement and this new industry is I fear more, not for myself. I feel like there's always I don't want to say always, but because everything changes, but I feel like at the stage that we're at, or if you're at a higher level and your career is more established and you have this background to kind of rely on, those opportunities for people at that level, I think will still be there. You'll be harnessing AI. You'll be the one crafting the messaging and prompt and all that. But my fear is more for just people breaking in and the shrinking of the job pool and the voices we're losing because of AI. I've been, you talk about the AI slop, and there's a ton of it on Instagram and all these social media places, but the beauty that I see coming through with some ideas that people are having, and they're crafting, amazing CGI renders with AI that 10 years ago would have taken 3 months for someone to really dial in and put the detail that you're getting into these, and the reflections and the, just the beauty that is involved in some of this that was such a time suck and a specialty for a lot of people, is now readily available to people. And for me, I love it because it's I don't have that time or that ability to go and really dive deep and learn CGI tools or video editing tools and things that from this point before would have been things that I would have hired out. I would have gone and found those people to do those kind of projects for me, are now kind of more at my fingertips. So for me, it's kind of exciting. And I love that I get to experiment more, and the quickness that I can ideate and get things pumped out is really exciting for me. But the fear for me, like I said, is where do those people go? How do you, how do we get the things that it's trained on? If those people are no longer able to make a living creating a CGI piece of amazing, landscape or something, like that's gone now. And now we're just going to have AI trained on AI. And are we going to lose the new voices and the new visions and the new ideas?
Yeah, it is. I think it's different too for the AI's impacts. There's kind of a difference being in-house versus agency. I know my wife works in marketing for a tech company. She's been working in tech for a long time, and you think about some of the things that they can do in-house that they couldn't do previously, and they can do it more efficiently. And then on the agency side, for us, if you're a smaller agency, we should be looking at it as an opportunity in some ways, right? If you can move quickly, you could be a 10-person agency that's now moving at the speed of a 40-person, right? Because you could do more. But I think that's where you have to move fast. You got to learn fast and figure out how to implement these things on the agency side. And then the one intangible, that thing that I just don't think is going to go away is that dynamic between the client and agency, right? This is very much, and we're reminded all the time, this is a client services industry. That's just what we do. Even though we put together great products and everything, and maybe this is the more of the client side of me or the client focus talking, but people want to work with people in that respect, right? When it comes to the creative process. So that will exist, but we'll have to figure out what that looks like.
Yeah.
And what the expectations are.
It's true. And I can't imagine a scenario in the future where a client that has no expertise in marketing or branding or something is going to just go, I'll have AI do. I'll just go in there and say, build me a brand. That I think is still going to require somebody on the other side to that knows the tools that even if they're AI and they're a one-person branding agency, it's like they'll still be that person because the client that's running the organization is not going to, even if that organization is all like replacing all of their jobs with AI, they're still like the one CEO founder that's sitting at the top. They're probably not going to want to spend the time to go in and prompt AI image, Mid-Journey or something to get the image for their brand. Like there's still going to be a middleman, I think, for at least a foreseeable future.
Yeah, I think there's still going to take effort there and knowledge in that particular space. One of the questions, Dan, that we ask, I think everyone that's been on so far, because they're all in different disciplines. We've asked our motion designer, our 3D animator. We asked our video production and our photo editor guests. We have had a lot of different folks on from different industries. And the question that we asked every single one of them is, hey, if you know a young person that's graduating or wants to get into your field, say agency work, communications, what advice do you give them now, seeing that the shift has, so much of the tool set has changed to AI? Does the advice change for them? In other words?
Yeah, I think, and this has been my take on it, again, as a somewhat creative, but you have to really be open-minded for a young person coming out of school or just getting into agency, right? You have to have this understanding and embracing the fact that if you're creative and you want to be around that space, that's great. You don't know where you're going to land, right? In terms of what you're doing on a day-to-day or where your passion might be, because what we're seeing with AI and just the industry as a whole is, things are changing. And, if you did production design way back when, that may not be your focus in a couple years, right? So I think the most important thing for anybody that's getting in or thinking about getting into agency is figure out how to be creative and to learn quickly. And you have to want to work with a lot of different organizations and to be challenged in different ways. There's really nothing boring about it, and that's a good thing. To me, that's all that matters, is that you understand what you're getting into, and that you just a willingness to kind of grow within that.
Yeah. And do you need to be like a jack of all trades or a Jill of all trades and master of none? Is skills becoming a premium value or a premium for new graduates rather than experience?
I don't think so. I mean, for the biggest skill, again, what we look for, because we have a lot of people that come in doing one thing and then, 2 years later they can do a whole lot more, or you find that their focus is on a little bit more on something else within that technical field. It's really about whether or not you can prove your chops. How quick are you to adapt and like evolve, right? Because the agency is just so different. Every client has an expectation that you are going to be the expert and you're going to come up with something for them that they've been battling with for years in 3 months. So there's process behind it and there's thinking behind it, and you have to be able to harness great ideas or just like a intellectual curiosity, and then you got to go and you got to move, and it's a bit of a sprint, right? I mean, I'll say that, it's both ways. 9 years in an agency goes by quick, and then it's also a lot of running,
Yeah.
But that's what you're looking for. You want somebody that's agile and somebody that's excited and and is just creative and curious. I don't think it matters so much whether or not whether you're an animator today or you're not, or whether you do brand design or you do production. There's plenty of avenues to grow.
Yeah.
And you will.
I think that's great advice.
Non-creative.
Yeah.
I really like it because I think about, people that have changed their creative strategy over the years and how creativity can lead you down so many different pathways. And I think we've talked with people that have gone down different pathways so often that I think you're exactly right on. The success in this industry is that being able to take your creative passion and your creative mindset and use whatever tools or whatever the strategy is, like being able to pivot and learn new things. And, I think about like Tom Ford and, a fashion designer that went on to direct movies that were great. And like the creativity that propelled him in success in one avenue, he could apply to a completely different industry. And so you can kind of think of it that way in some ways. So I think that's great advice.
Absolutely. Well, Dan, unfortunately, our time is running out.
And you know what that means?
What does it mean, Clark?
It's time for our Inside the Actors Studio question of the day.
Oh,
Dan, this is the segment of the show that I like to bring back the classic James Lipton questions because I missed that show. It was such a great interview show. This one, I'm going to ask you, what turns you off creatively? Is there anything that you run into and you're like, God, this is just mind-numbing, the opposite of beautiful art, the opposite of a beautiful sunset? What really hits you and you're just, is it a spreadsheet? That's what it is for me. I hate spreadsheets.
That too.
Those are terrible things.
There's three. I have like three things.
Yeah, go for it.
There's no limit here.
Nope.
Okay. Hours, tracking hours when I have to do that. That's like, and it's not fair because everybody gets a deal on me. I tell you, if I put 3 hours, I'd probably spend like 9 hours because I sit here and I think about things. So
am I going to get an invoice for this show after?
Yeah.
I hate the hours.
Only charge you for 30 minutes, give you 15 minutes off here. Hours are one. I pretty much hate like stock photography. I just can't stand it. Yeah, and it just feels like whether you're into the brand or you're mocking up concepts, I can't tell you how much time I spend looking through. Maybe I don't have photography from the client. I have to go through all this stuff, and it's just like everything looks bad. Okay. And the third one is, and I have to deal with this all the time, and it's just like, make the logo bigger, it's like, but can they see it? And you have, it's like, what are we doing here? What are we doing here? Can you make it? Are you sure people can be able to see it? So, those are all three, very like minute things that we deal with, but we hate it. They're just kind of cringeworthy stuff that's happened about a billion times over my time.
I'm never going to ask that question again. That was rough. That you just brought a lot of deep-seated
he left out
the
make it pop.
Yeah, make it pop, make it bigger.
That's a good one.
Or stand out.
Or I'm just not wowed. Ah,
Oh, that
okay.
one really is upsetting.
Okay,
actually,
got it. Well, I don't know what wows you.
It's so personal.
It's
It's not. It's not
It's
an
very
objective.
subjective.
Was that
I'm
in
just
the
not
go
wowed.
back to the creative brief? I didn't have any goals in there that said make the client wow.
Yeah, that was not part of our strategy.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, those are, you know all that stuff. You guys, you're probably closer to that than I am. I'm just,
Well, we're glad even someone more on the agency client side feels the same way. So we have the same cringe triggers,
Mm-hmm.
which is good.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
So,
I got to
well, Dan,
walk people back here. Yeah, when that
Yeah.
happens.
no, for sure. Well, Dan, thanks so much for joining us on the Somewhat Creative Show.
If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe wherever you listen. And if you're feeling generous, leave us a review.
Huge thanks to our guest. And as always, stay curious, stay creative.
See you next time.
Thanks,
Bye,
you guys.